Good news, there are at least 4 former and ex-members to summon the Central College before a religious disciplinary committee. We can be more, so don't hesitate to contact me privately. I will keep you informed of the developments of this action in a few weeks. This series is going to end soon. I am making this episode, then an epilogue next week. Then I might occasionally do a show to inform you about the progress of my complaint and other actions taken regarding the Jehovah's Witnesses. Some have contacted me and are considering creating a YouTube channel with video testimonials about the adverse effects of vaccination campaigns. I strongly encourage this initiative. If you are ready to testify, don't hesitate to contact me privately. I will put you in touch with the person who told me about it. After filing a complaint with the CNIL to request the deletion of my personal data, I started looking for a lawyer to determine if the Religious Association of Jehovah's Witnesses of France, which issued the discriminatory note on December 19, 2022, could be prosecuted. I remind you that the communication on December 19, 2022 prohibited unvaccinated individuals from accessing training rooms. After 4 months of research, I consulted a lawyer who had won a case defending an unvaccinated person who was suspended for 18 months, meaning they were deprived of their salary during that entire period. After describing my situation, here are the 4 legal violations identified by this lawyer. Discrimination, failure to respect free and informed consent, endangerment of others' lives, violation of privacy. Frankly, I hadn't thought of all that. And I realized that what I had felt inside, this unbearable discrimination, was actually much more serious than I thought. Let's analyze what the law says about each of these violations. Everything that follows obviously concerns France. Here is what Article 225(1) of the Penal Code states. Discrimination is any distinction made between individuals based on criteria such as health status, political opinions. The refusal to get vaccinated can be considered an opinion potentially linked to political opinions. A person may also refuse vaccination for health reasons. Thus, discriminating against the unvaccinated fully falls within the scope of this law. The penalties provided by Article 225(2) are up to 3 years of imprisonment and a €45,000 fine for cases of discrimination by a private individual. So here are the 2 objections that could be raised by the Association of Jehovah's Witnesses. The state had established a vaccine pass that prohibited the unvaccinated from accessing certain places. The association simply acted in the same manner. However, the vaccine pass was suspended on March 14, 2022. Thus, on December 19, 2022, it was no longer required and had no legal basis, especially since the vaccine pass did not apply to religious gatherings. The situation was roughly similar in most countries around the world. By the way, just because the state has passed a law does not mean it is necessarily in accordance with the constitution of our country. Moreover, a law can be repealed later on. Article 1 of the Constitution of 1958 states, France respects all beliefs. The refusal to get vaccinated falls under beliefs, despite what the despots who want everyone to think the same way might wish. As Bernard Besserès, a French theologian, said, "Evil is the good that one wants to impose on others." The second objection that could be raised to the law on discrimination. The Jehovah's Witnesses Association is a private association that can set its own rules. Yes, indeed. But this freedom to define rules is not absolute. If the ban on access for the unvaccinated is arbitrary, and it was because in the communication of December 19, 2022, it did not mention any reason, and disproportionate, it can be condemned by a judge. Disproportionate, obviously. Whether you were vaccinated or unvaccinated, there had been no test on transmission. Here's the text of the communication from December 19, 2022. Conditions to be met regarding vaccination. Only those who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 will be able to attend in person at a theocratic school. And a little further it says, prohibition, it's forbidden, there's the sentence, period. Furthermore, health authorities indicate that one benefits blah 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 blah, And in the end, it is not planned for students to attend classes via video conference. So there is no alternative solution. And no reason is given to justify this prohibition. The words furthermore do not indicate a reason, but add additional information without establishing a causal link. It is forbidden, period. We don't know why. It is forbidden. So for me, there is obviously discrimination against a very large number of people just for the elders. If 1 in 100 elders is unvaccinated, which is what I have observed, that represents 8,000 people worldwide. We can add the pioneers who are 10 times more numerous than the elders. This concerns about 100,000 people around the world. That's not insignificant. This is the main subject of my complaint. The complaint also mentions the complicity of the 10 elders who pushed me to resign. Thus, this offense, complicity, is also mentioned. If you support or have supported this discrimination, here is the law that applies to you. Article 121(7) of the Penal Code is an accomplice to a crime or an offense. The person who, knowingly by aid or assistance, including abuse of authority or power, has provoked an offense or given instructions to commit it. Thus, the 10 elders who handled my case are all accountable for this crime. They clearly facilitated the discrimination and were aware of participating in an offense because I told them so. This complicity was intentional, as they all agreed to examine the required conditions and thus push me to resign. Article L111(4) of the Public Health Code states, every person makes decisions concerning their health. No treatment can be administered without the free and informed consent of the person. Here is what can be read on the community medication sheet, the Pfizer vaccine. Myocarditis and pericarditis. There is an increased risk of myocarditis and pericarditis after vaccination with Comirnaty. And the last sentence says this: some cases required intensive medical care and fatal outcomes have been observed. This means you have a product that can cause death, quite simply. If you are vaccinated, did the healthcare professional tell you this? Well, now you know. How does the communication from December 19, 2022, which required participants in the Elders and Pioneers course to be fully vaccinated, contradict free and informed consent? It is an implicit constraint. If an individual must be vaccinated to participate in the course, they will feel compelled to accept a medical treatment they would not have otherwise accepted. This is perceived as a form of pressure incompatible with the notion of free consent. Article 223(1) of the Penal Code states, the act of directly exposing another person to an immediate risk of death or injury, likely to cause mutilation or permanent disability, is punishable by 1 year of imprisonment and a fine of 15,000 euros. We have previously seen that cases of fatal outcomes have been observed. Thus, forcing the intake of a medication without considering potential risks can endanger the lives of the elderly and pioneers, especially those with medical risks such as asthma, allergies, or medical history. Article 9 of the Civil Code states, everyone has the right to respect for their private life. How does this apply to our situation? Requiring the elderly to be vaccinated involves disclosing a health-related data. The vaccination status constitutes intimate information pertaining to private life. If this obligation is imposed without their free consent, and it conditions their participation in an essential religious activity, namely the role of elder, it represents an intrusion into their private sphere. There you have it. We have covered the laws that are being violated, that have been violated. Do you understand the extent of the problem, and especially its seriousness? I therefore filed a complaint in July 2023 with the Bordeaux Judicial Court. The judges, being very reluctant to take on such cases, with the government itself having committed serious violations of the law, I had to become a civil party to compel the judge to examine the case. 6 months later, he sidestepped the issue by declaring that he was incompetent, on the grounds that the Cultural Association of Jehovah's Witnesses of France is located in Boulogne-Billancourt and not in Bordeaux. I am therefore filing a new complaint, this time with the Nanterre Court, hoping that the judge will agree to take on the case. Let's talk about the costs associated with a complaint. Attorney fees amount to about €1,000. Be aware that your liability insurance may reimburse part of these fees. Moreover, when you become a civil party, you must deposit a sum equivalent to 1 month's salary. This amount is returned at the end of the trial. If you wish to join my complaint, contact me. This means that you were a former or pioneer in December 2022 and that you were discriminated against because of the note from December 19th, 2022. Also plan to gather testimonies. This can include your spouse or other individuals who can confirm that you experienced discrimination and that it resulted in harm. Here is a step I have taken. I sent a registered letter to each person who discriminated against me, outlining their fault and offering them the opportunity to repent. I specified that in the absence of a response from them, I reserved the right to initiate legal action. I addressed this letter to the French branch as well as to the 10 elders. I did not receive any response, but at least I brought their infraction to their attention. For me, the discrimination suffered by the elders and pioneers clearly falls under the law. We will see what arguments the association will present. It is certain that the more of us there are, the more weight we will have. Otherwise, if you wish to file a complaint, contact a lawyer and explain what you have experienced. For a civil complaint, you have until 2026 to act. After that, it will be too late. The first situation that comes to mind is that of a Jehovah's Witness who absolutely did not want to get vaccinated but ended up doing so and fell ill. In this case, the governing body has protected itself well because you must prove that it influenced you. This requires solid testimonies showing that you refused vaccination and eventually gave in under pressure. Then, if you fell ill, you need a certificate from your doctor as well as a report to pharmacovigilance to establish a link between your illness and the vaccine. You will also need to submit a request to ONIAM, the organization that compensates victims of medical accidents. The association, Moitié Messe Déclare, can help you file your report of adverse events. In other words, it's an almost impossible battle to fight. But I am not discouraging you. Quite the opposite. If you feel it, do it. It's essential for your mental and physical health. And here I return to the responsibility of the Central College. Not only was he at best negligent, but he then did everything to avoid taking responsibility. If you still trust these men, I wish you much courage for the future. See you next week.